orderly in one of our regiments, and he and the corporal always slept together. Well, the other night, the corporal had a baby, for the corporal turned out to be a woman. She'd been in 3 or 4 fights. Solomon Newton, 10th, Massachusetts.
Melinda Blaylock in Tennessee didn't want to be apart from her lover, so she chopped off her hair, put on a shirt, and was able to enlist as his 16-year-old brother. When he was discharged, she revealed herself and was indeed discharged at the same time, reason being a woman. Edwin Wakeman was actually Rosetta Wakeman. She wrote long, poignant letters about the life of a soldier. She ironically participated in the Red River campaign. The commander had issued an executive order that no women should be allowed to come along on this campaign. Little did he imagine that not only was Private Wakeman a woman, but also Albert Cashier was another soldier.
Albert Cashier was really Jeannie Hodges, an Irish immigrant. Both Jeannie and Rosetta marched side by side in the Red River campaign.
Dear father and mother, it would make your hair stand out to be where I've been. How would you like to be in the front and have the rear rank load and fire their guns over your shoulders? Goodbye from your Edwin Wakeman, or Rosetta Wakeman, 153rd New York Volunteers.
Only Rosetta's family knew of her secret. In 1864, she died of dysentery in a New Orleans military hospital. Her identity remained undiscovered.
Rosetta Wakeman had a ring where she had engraved in the ring her regiment as well as her own name, something that gives us a piece of real evidence of her service. And she's buried in a grave marked Edwin, but we're just now, through her letters and these artifacts, able to recover her life.
There exist only a few well-documented cases of women soldiers. The 2nd Michigan Infantry enlisted the services of a Private Franklin Thompson. Thompson was actually a Canadian-born woman named Sarah Edmonds.
I thank God that I am permitted in this hour of my adopted country's need to express a tithe of gratitude which I feel toward the people of the northern states. Sarah Edmonds, alias Private Franklin Thompson, 1861.
Certainly the best documented soldier was Sarah Edmonds, who served as Franklin Thompson. She wrote up her exploits as a nurse, a scout, a spy after the war, and we have independently verifiable accounts that she did indeed serve as a soldier.
While serving at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Sarah Edmonds contracted malaria. Rather than risk being discovered, she deserted the Army.
There are numerous accounts in letters and even occasionally in official reports that refer to stories of women being found dead on the battlefield, dressed as soldiers. There was a woman who was found dead in front of the stone wall where Pickett's charge was made at Gettysburg. What was her name? We'll probably never know.
After the war, a member of the Sanitary Commission made an educated guess that there were 400 women who served as soldiers during the war. We know certainly not how many women served. How many women were buried as soldiers in unmarked graves is something that we'll never know.
Although the Blue and Gray did not recruit women as soldiers, they did recruit women as spies.
It was very easy for women to be spies because you just didn't expect women to do this, which is why so many of them got away with it as much as they did.
Espionage was an important factor for both the Northern and Southern effort during the war. We have examples of little girls getting on horseback, riding all night, returning before sunrise, and passing along valuable information on troop movements and size, which was a key factor in battles. Society women found it very useful to sew into the lining of dresses, cloaks, coded messages, to indeed use dressmakers' patterns to pass information back and forth from household to household.
Elizabeth Van Loo, nicknamed Crazy Beth, was considered one of the most effective spies for the Union.
Elizabeth Van Lew became even more eccentric in her behavior than she'd been before the war. She contacted her former slave and convinced her to come back and to play the role of the inferior black servant, to return to the Confederate White House as a spy. It's really a great irony that sexism and racism played such a strong role, so that the White House of the Confederacy was able to be infiltrated by a Union spy and smuggle this information back to Washington, where it became invaluable in many battles, Gettysburg among others.
The Confederacy also had its share of secret agents.
Perhaps the most outstanding of these was Mrs. Rose Greenhow, a Washington socialite who entertained almost nightly at her Washington, D.C. home. She made sure the guest list included prominent senators, military officers, cabinet members. She ensured as well that the wine flowed copiously during the meal so that the tongues would wag, which they did. And at the conclusion of each meal, one of her servants would be galloping over into Virginia to deliver up-to-date news on the Union situations here in Washington.
Greenhow, nicknamed Wild Rose, was put under house arrest by federal officers for her espionage activities, but she still managed to smuggle out coded messages to the front.
Greenhow had been so successful at smuggling out information from her home, which became known as Fort Greenhow, that the Union felt it necessary to confine her to the old Capitol prison with her daughter. Upon her release, she was brought to Richmond, given a heroine's welcome where Jefferson Davis commended her for her role in the victory at Manassas.
In 1862, Confederate President Jefferson Davis sent Wild Rose to Europe to lobby support for their cause. But her return voyage ended in tragedy.
She was bringing along secret and important documents and also a vast amount of gold. She was forced off her large ship into a rowboat and trying to sneak past federal patrols. The boat sank. Her body was recovered along with some of the gold. She was laid in state on the Wilmington dock, given a hero's burial, and indeed treated as one of the great martyrs of the Confederacy.
To this end, I employed every capacity with which God endowed me, and the result was far more successful than my hopes could have flattered me to believe. Rose Greenhow.
Oh, my brothers, what have we lived for except you? We who would so gladly have laid down our lives for yours are left desolate to mourn. Sarah Morgan, March 1864.
Most women never expected the conflict to last as long as it did. But as the months stretched into years, the physical and emotional burden was almost too much to bear.
If anything, they dwelled in a world of anxiety. And Mrs. Murray Chestnut, the most famous diarist in America, pointed out numerous times of a wife who might hear that her husband had been killed. And, said Mrs. Chestnut, she went upstairs, got in her bed, turned her face to the wall, and died, simply because, literally, she lost the will to live.
Grief and constant anxiety kill nearly as many women as men die on the battlefield. Mary Chestnut.
In 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman and his army invaded the South. For white Southern women, the war had arrived at their doorsteps.
I think there's a fairly standard myth about Southern white women. I would call it the Scarlett O'Hara myth. There's sort of this idea that Southern white women would do anything for the cause, and that idea has been overstated. White Southern women felt the effects of the war in ways that Northern white women did not. For white Southern women, the war meant shortages because of the blockade that was imposed around the Confederacy. This meant that for Southern white women, survival was difficult.
Mills, crops, foodstuffs, livestock, these were the things that were destroyed or confiscated. By and large, the homes were left standing. And when discipline broke down, Union soldiers would ransack homes looking for money, looking for valuables.
250,000 white Southern women became refugees of war, fleeing their homes from the invading Union Army.
Women searching for their babies along the road where they had been lost. Others sitting in the dust, crying and wringing their hands. Sarah Morgan, Baton Rouge, 1862.
Newly freed Southern black women had also become refugees of war.
Even before Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves were leaving the plantations in droves. African-American women generally ended up in contraband camps. Once they got to the camps, they had to deal with the squalor there, and about 25% of the population in those camps died from starvation and disease and exposure to the elements.
Northern women also understood the horrors of war at the home front. At Gettysburg, Jenny Wade was killed by battle crossfire that ripped through her sister's home while she was baking bread.
It was a mighty terrible thing when war passed your way. Gettysburg, certainly the most famous case in point. This little town, devastated by the carnage, the unburied dead, the terrible stench of the battlefield. But the women, of course, had to deal with this.
By April of 1865, the Civil War had ended. Along with the hundreds upon thousands of men, untold numbers of women lost their lives to disease, starvation, and battle. For the survivors, the grieving wouldn't end, but amidst their sorrow emerged a legacy.
The greatest change for American women occurred for black women who had been slaves. Black women who had been slaves went from slavery to freedom. However, the great change was there because they had started from such an oppressed position.
It was a terrible thing that it took this war to do it. But there's no question in my mind that this was a tremendous impetus for American women to come into their own. In the course of those 4 years, they broke into industry, into business. They literally established a field of nursing in this country. Clara Barton would usher in basically the American Red Cross.
If nothing else, the war forced society to come to terms with the public woman. Men may not have been pleased with the fact that women were moving beyond the household domain, but they had no choice but to accept women in the public arena.
During this 4 years drama, I was sometimes in the audience, once or twice upon the stage itself. When the curtain fell at last, they stamped their impression on my young life. They strengthened me for undertakings for which I otherwise would have lacked nerve and endurance, and gave me a fonder longing for the comforts of peace. Septima Collis, 1865.
The women who endured the Civil War left a legacy of greater freedom for all women that had never existed before. Old stereotypes of women's lack of courage and intelligence were weakened, and women emerged from the wreckage and carnage of the bloodiest war in American history into a new society where a woman's place was not always confined to the home.